Sure. Comment on two things today. The GBPA executive response at the GB Outlook. Obviously, he said some things with regards to the government's relationship with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. I want to get your comments on that. And also, there's now some lists going around, floating around on social media with regards to political parties' candidates for the upcoming election. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see that list or if it was forwarded to you, but kind of clarify if it is an updated list, or and when could we expect to see something from the PLP, if you can comment on that.
Well, first of all, a list was sent to me yesterday, something that's been circulating on social media. That's fake. The Progressive Liberal Party doesn't operate in that way. And if there were a list generated of candidates, it would be officially announced by the officers of the party. So that's complete foolishness. All members of parliament are still in good standing and operating in their constituencies, and so any such list should be ignored as nonsense.
Okay, are you able to say when anything will be happening with the Progressive Liberal Party, when a list will be published?
The election is not due until October 2026, so people still have their work to do as members of parliament. All members of parliament, the Progressive Liberal Party, are busy at the wheel trying to take care of their constituencies. So the question of when the candidates committee meets is really a matter which is much later down the road than now. There's no emergency which exists which causes that to have to happen. So the processes of governance are still going on, and there's a lot of work to do. As I often say, miles to go before we sleep.
Right. Um, so as of right now, everything is the wheels are in motion in terms of campaigning and so on and so forth with the candidates and the current cabinet ministers and those representing.
Well, there are no candidates. There are members of parliament. There are senators. And all those members of parliament and senators are busy working their various constituencies and doing their jobs to govern the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to ensure that there's peace and good order in the country. That's happening. There's nothing which I know of which has interrupted that. The candidates process only obtains once there's a general election in sight, and at the moment there is none, and I don't expect it to be until the mandate runs out in 2026. Now, what is happening is because the FNM made a fool of themselves by calling elections 8 months too early, they and their minions are trying to spin these various yarns to try and force us to do the same stupidness that Minnis did. But we're not up to that. That's an old trick.
Okay. Getting to the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the recent comments made by one of the executives there at the Outlook, you also had a response to that. Can you kind of share your response to what he had to say as it relates to the relationship with the government?
Well, I'm always surprised at the silliness of this fellow who represents the Grand Bahama Port Authority's ineptitude and his, just stepping in it when things when he shouldn't stay. He should stay out of it. First of all, I thought that there was an understanding between the sides where there's an arbitration going on to stay out of the press and not try and poison the well. That's certainly the restraint which we had been exercising because we don't want anything to do to ruin the legal process according to those rules. However, if you proceed from one side to poison the well or try to poison the well, the PLP has to respond. So that's why our response came forward. And it's pretty straightforward. This is a yarn that this man is spinning. The reason why there's an issue with what is happening in Freeport and Grand Bahama is not because of some immigration policies, not because there's been any slowdown in approvals by the government, because I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister, who's the Minister for Investment, and he says he's unaware of any complaint about slowness or anything, no specific complaints. So this fellow's just making up things to give excuses for why his company and the shareholders in that company cannot perform their obligations under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And that's the only thing. Do you have the money? Do you have the ideas to move the Port Authority to do what it's supposed to do under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement? If you don't have it, then you need to have someone else come and do it. That's all the government's position is. That's the PLP's position. Now, all the rest of this is just horse dead and cow fat. I mean, you can't even finish the Tano Bridge, for God's sake. I mean, what is that? You allowed it to fall into disrepair, It's been closed for months now or half used, saying that it has a limited tonnage that can go over it, which people are widely ignoring. You can't finish that, and you're talking about the government being responsible for what is happening in the city. Yeah, we're responsible for this. Whatever economic activity, the upward trajectory in the city, you got to say Ginger, Moxie, um, the Minister for Investments, who's Chester Cooper, the Prime Minister, have all been working assiduously to make sure that Grand Bahama gets lifted off the ground. That's why you see the activity there. That's why Carnival is there. That's why the shipyard is there. Nothing to do with them, the Port Authority. They dumped the airport on the Bahamian people for $1. It's going to cost $250 million to fix it. Then they allowed their partners to dump the hotel at an overvalue, sold it for more than it was worth to the Bahamas government. It's costing something like $1 million a month to keep it going because we need the employment up there in Grand Bahama. So they can't, this fella can't be talking any of that stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. So I wish he would just refrain and leave this matter alone. And I suggested that Sarah St. George ought to speak to him and tell him it's time for him to keep his mouth quiet in these matters in Grand Bahama. And lastly, I want to say this about this. What is really, really offensive, and this is offensive in every meaning of that word, given where we are and all the history of the relations between people who have money and people who don't have money in the Bahamas, to say that you are friends with the Prime Minister's wife and you like the Prime Minister and blah, blah, blah. What the heck is liking the Prime Minister and being a friend of the Prime Minister's wife got to do with a public policy question? The public policy question is this: can you perform the provisions of the Grand Bahama, the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, or can you not? If you can't, then someone else has to do it because the city has to survive. So that's our general response to him.
To the assertion of him saying that, he has a good, or likes the Prime Minister's wife, and it gives the assertion that there's a relationship in private that the public don't necessarily see.
Well,
And
yes.
right, so what do you say to that when he says stuff like that? Because he's painting this picture as though what you see in the public is not what's happening behind closed doors.
Well, it's a complete fiction. It's a complete fiction, and he's trying to poison the well. It's false. It's dishonest and dishonorable. And that's what's so egregiously offensive about it. And he needs to be called out on it. And so I called the Prime Minister and said, what is with this fellow? But he likes the Prime Minister. You don't have to like the Prime Minister. Nobody cares whether you like the Prime Minister or you don't like him. The fact is, can you perform your obligations under the Hawksbill Creek Agreement? That's it. All the rest of it is horse dead and cow fat.
Okay. And you also made some comments stating that GBPA has developed a reputation in the city and island of extracting profits, liquidation assets, and enjoying the fruits of these profits along with expert public relations. Can you expound on that?
Well, in this sense, so the hotel no longer belongs to Hutchison. They're partners, so that was offloaded. They've sold every asset. The power company is sold. I think the only thing they now own is the water company. The sanitation company doesn't belong to them. They can barely fix the roads. They said that they allocated $600,000 to fixing roads. The Minister of Works at the time told me it costs $1 million a mile to fix roads in the Bahamas. So I don't know how many roads you're going to fix with $600,000. And then, of course, the coup de grace is they can't fix the airport, so they dump it on the Bahamian public for $1. That's going to cost $250 million to upgrade and to fix. That's the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And they want us to have that status quo continue. So what this appears to be is the generation that's now the shareholders in the port, after fighting like cats and dogs in the courts, right, see this as simply cocktail talk. I go to London and they say, oh, I own Freeport. I'm the owner of Grand Bahama, whatever it is they wish. That's the way it comes off. Not serious. These are people's lives in the Bahamas that are being affected by the policies of this company. And look, push has really come to shove, and the comments are really inaccurate and offensive. Irrelevant, in fact.
Considering the arbitration which is now in process, I know that it is not the government's intent, as the Prime Minister stated, to receive ownership of Freeport, but only to receive what is owed to the government. Is that still the intent?
No, I don't want to describe or say what the intent or isn't. What the Prime Minister says stands. He's the chief policy maker, so I stand by whatever he says. All I'm saying is, in this present situation, the comments were inappropriate, irrelevant, should not have been made, and he should really refrain from making any further comments because he's damaging his own interests. That's what I think.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Anything
All
else
right,
you want to add?
I just want to add this. There's going to be a formal statement coming out shortly because it appears that there's an attempt to play out some kind of geopolitical friction within the Bahamas between China on the one side and the United States on the other side. I just
Right.
want to make this clear. I've said this to ambassadors who've served in the Bahamas before. We don't need to have a public dialogue over where the Bahamas stands on the United States or doesn't stand on the United States. A country that's 50 miles away, an economy that's in the trillions of dollars, as opposed to one that's in the billions, the small billions of dollars, that we have kith and kin across the cultural divide between the United States and the Bahamas. What is there to question about the relationship? The relationship is great. The partner of choice, it's fine. There's no issue at all. We have a respectful mutual interest with the Chinese, in the sense that in 1997 we signed diplomatic relations with them. We agreed on a one China policy. That China policy is being pursued. There's no ideological quid pro quo between us and them on anything. Neither is there any evidence of any design to do so or to fight a geopolitical war on the doorfront of the United States. In fact, they themselves say it would just be unwise to think so. So I just want Bahamians to know that U.S. and Bahamas relations are on even keel. There's no issue at all, and that's the story. And I intend it to go on further.
That would stem from the U.S. Chartered Affairs comments at the Business Outlook with regards to
Well,
China.
yeah, I saw these headlines, two headlines this morning. One about that, and the other about some congressman suggesting that the Secretary of State ought to go to the CARICOM meeting, which is coming up. I think all of that is fine. But you have these blaring headlines, and when you have these blaring headlines, it gives alarm in our population, and there's no need to do so. Everything's fine. Believe me, it's fine. There's no issue. Whoever the United States elects, they elect. Whatever their rules are, their rules are. And we follow the rules of the international community. We get along with everybody, and everything's fine.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Great.
All right.
Recording stop.